Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if the Ottoman Empire never joined World War One. The Ottoman Empire was in 1914 already past its glory days. The sick man of Europe was a frequent nickname. But we shouldn't forget that the Ottomans in their height were able to achieve great and even remarkable things. Let's just talk about the territory. The Ottoman Empire was almost as big, if not even bigger, than the Eastern Roman Empire, spanning from northern Africa to the parts of Arabia, Turkey, for instance, as well, and it even went until the doors of Vienna. The Ottoman Empire was not that unified. It was not an empire led by only one big dominant ethnicity, one big dominant religion, but there were many ethnicities, you had many religions, and you had also many languages, many cultures. This became later on a problem, especially in the age of nationalism. Arab nationalism was thriving, and it became indeed a problem. And so did Kurdish nationalism, not to mention all the other types of nationalisms, which already happened way before. The Ottoman Empire was somewhat stable, more stable than we usually tend to think during World War I. The problem was only that the reforms that were already initiated with the Tanzimat system, they didn't go far enough. And as a result, the internal division was what ultimately caused its demise. The Brits, the Russians and the French wanted to get a share of the Ottoman Empire. And because the Ottomans were part of the Central Powers, they didn't only lose their territories, but they also lost their monarchy at the end. Russia, France and the Brits, they proclaimed themselves as protector of some minority, or at the end they proclaimed some economic interest, or they proclaimed that some zones they were in their interest, and they had very high plans. A civil war, moreover, also erupted in the Turkish heartlands, and the monarchy became totally abolished. Finally, Turkey could never really become as big as the Ottoman Empire was. All of this was for a single reason, and that's because the Ottomans, they joined World War I on the losing side, on the side of the Central Powers. So what if all of that changed? What if the Ottoman Empire never joined World War I? The main point of divergence we could use is that while there were some factions that wanted to have an alliance with the German Empire, these factions in this timeline, they would not become that dominant. They would not impose or establish themselves. Maybe after analyzing their situation, the Ottoman Empire situation, the Ottomans would rather focus on stabilizing their empire instead of making big plans of expansion, for instance. The Ottoman Empire had various peoples, ethnicities, religions, languages, and these peoples, they would be able to revolt at any given time if there was some support from the outside. Now let's just imagine what could happen if the army is engaged in a war and the population then starts to rebel. The Ottomans would perhaps still ally with the Germans, but tell them that they could not enter a war in the next few years. The borders would of course be guarded, especially with Russia. The administration would focus on reforms and try to integrate certain peoples as much as they could, especially peoples that were already considered Muslim or very close to the Turks. Now, don't get me wrong, I will not say that this will become some sort of rainbow empire where everything will be great and whatnot, but they will have to recognize at least some languages. They will also have to elevate the status of some people. I'm not going to say that we will see something like Austria-Hungary, where instead of Austria-Hungary we will have Turkey-Arabia within the Ottoman Empire, but something similar to it could perhaps happen to some degree. But here are the key differences. While in the Turkish parts there was an elite, the Arabic population had very different customs from the Turks. They were more clan-based, and they also had internal issues between each other. Already even families among themselves, they had issues. That's why we have different Arabic states nowadays, for instance. It's not that easy to just unite them all. The Ottomans would also, of course, know that they had oil in some parts of the territory, and a lot of money would flow into certain parts of the empire, investments and whatnot. With that, we could also see more Turks moving to places like in Mesopotamia or the Arabian Peninsula. We could then get like little enclaves of a Turkish majority. One thing is for sure, the Ottomans will not regain Northern Africa back. Cyprus too, it's very unlikely that they will regain it, and this would be very clear, but they would still have hopes of reclaiming these so-called lost lands eventually. World War I would turn out to be different, and maybe a quicker victory over Germany could happen. But the Russian Revolution would still happen, and even with the Ottomans around, we would still get the Soviet Union in place. Syria, Jordan, Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Iraq, this would not become a thing. These lands would officially still be part of the Ottoman Empire. As for Russian claims, we could perhaps see some diplomatic efforts be made between the Ottomans and the Soviets, in which the Soviets would agree to not claim any lands of the Ottomans, while the Ottomans would recognize the Soviet Union, for instance, and some minimal trade would happen, especially between the Turkic lands of the Soviet Union and the Ottoman Empire. In the interwar period, Britain and France would make a lot of pressure on the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottomans would not take it kindly. We may even see some concessions, some proxy wars, but not a full escalation, because France and Britain, they would still be very tired of World War I, even if it was a much quicker one. World War II would be a time where things would be, a little bit more spicy. First of all, I'm sure that after reforming, internal strength, exploitation of resources, infrastructure, investments, the Ottomans, they would be very ready for war. They would perhaps even join the Axis, and this is the most likely part. They could then attack Greece with Italy together. And the Ottomans would also be able to block the Suez Canal and even get to take parts of Egypt. The Italians could potentially join the Ottoman efforts from Libya, and together Italy and the Ottomans, they could deal a huge blow on the British war efforts. The Brits could potentially request Iran to join the war efforts, and after Barbarossa and some Soviet pressure as well, Iran would then open up a front against the Ottomans, and they would make quick gains, and the Axis advances in Northern Africa and against the Soviets, they would be halted for some time. Two different outcomes are possible in this scenario. The first one is that the Axis still loses, and I'm not going to focus on other countries, but the Ottomans, they would lose some territories, but not as much as they actually did after World War I. Small border changes in the European parts or Western Turkey, they could happen. We could see a potential Kurdish SSR. It could be established, or an enlarged Armenian SSR. An entity like Kuwait could be established so that the Brits, they could extract a lot of petrol. And something akin to Israel may also be established as a buffer between Egypt and the remaining Ottomans. Some independent Arabic states or state could also gain independence. A few changes between the Iranian-Ottoman border, but that would be the maximum. And after, the Americans would try to get the Ottomans on their side, and they may be able to do so. But this time around, this remaining Ottoman Empire would have more power and influence than Turkey. It would also be much easier to manage such a big ally because you don't have many smaller Arabic states here and there. And this bigger Ottoman Empire would potentially even have more wealth and could be on a more equal footing with other NATO and Western powers. They could actually be one of the biggest Western power if they use their advantage very smartly. And in here I'm talking about the petroleum. And with the collapse of the Soviet Union, this alternate Ottoman Empire would get a lot of influence, potentially even over Armenians and other populations, due to the fact that the Armenian genocide would never have happened. This version of the Ottoman Empire would be a wealthier one, and much wealthier than Otyal's Turkey. It could even perhaps be more democratic and have a parliamentary monarchy, more power, military, economically and politically speaking, yet still have some grudges against other powers and neighbors. The second outcome is that the Axis win. They may not get a total victory in here, but they would get peace out with Britain, push the Soviets way back, and the US may not even be able to intervene or get access in the coasts. The Ottomans would immediately reclaim parts of Greece, all of Cyprus, Egypt, the Caucasus, and even lead a few successful attempts at getting Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, Turkmen, Uzbeks, and other Turkic people to rebel against the Soviets. The Ottomans would still have joined the Nazis, but I don't think that they would become as extreme as the Nazis. We may actually even be able to see them turn against Germany or perhaps even Italy when the time would be right. This Ottoman Empire would be way stronger and more developed than the Ottoman Empire before World War I. It would actually be a very scary empire, and they would be able to pose a threat against Italy and maybe even a victorious Nazi Germany. And that's where we leave it for now.
That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.